Vampire King called her temporary, so she disappeared with his unborn heir. The ancient castle stood against the crimson twilight like a monument to eternity itself. Within its obsidian halls, the Vampire King Casimir Nightshade ruled the immortal realm with an iron fist that had never known mercy, until the night she walked through his doors. Serafina Mora wasn't supposed to be there. The daughter of a minor vampire lord from the southern territories, she had been sent as a peace offering, a diplomatic gesture wrapped in silk and false smiles. Her father's province had fallen behind on their blood tithes, and rather than face the king's wrath, he'd offered something he believed more valuable, his daughter's service to the crown. A temporary arrangement, Casimir had announced to his court, his silver eyes barely glancing at the young woman who stood before his throne. She will serve as royal companion until the debt is paid, nothing more. The words cut through Serafina like silver blades, but she kept her face perfectly neutral. She had been trained since childhood in the art of courtly composure, though nothing could have prepared her for the devastating beauty of the Vampire King himself. Casimir was tall and imposing, with hair as black as a raven's wing and features carved from marble, but it was his eyes that haunted her, ancient, cold, and completely devoid of warmth. Temporary, she whispered to herself that first night, standing in the opulent chambers that had been assigned to her. The word echoed in the vast emptiness of the room. Around her neck hung a silver pendant her mother had given her before she died, the only warmth she had left. The first weeks were torture wrapped in velvet gloves. Casimir barely acknowledged her existence except during formal court functions, where she was expected to stand beside his throne like a beautiful statue. She was introduced as the temporary companion, never by name, never with any indication that she was more than a placeholder in his eternal existence. But Serafina was not one to fade into the background. Unlike the other courtiers who cowered before the king's presence, she began to challenge him, subtly at first, then with growing boldness. "Your Majesty seems particularly disinterested in the trade negotiations with the Western Covens," she remarked one evening during a private dinner. These dinners had become routine, though Casimir spent most of them reviewing documents while she sat in silence. He looked up, surprised she'd spoken. "And what would you know of such matters?" "I know that Lord Brennan is embezzling from the trade routes. I know that half the lost shipments are being sold on the black market in human cities. And I know that if you'd spend less time reminding everyone I'm temporary and more time watching your advisors, you might actually notice." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Casimir's eyes flashed dangerously. "You forget your place, girl." "My place," Serafina stood, her own power beginning to shimmer around her like heat waves. She might not be as ancient or powerful as he was, but she was no weakling. "My place is wherever I make it. You want me silent and decorative, then you should have requested a portrait, not a person." For the first time since her arrival, Casimir truly looked at her. What he saw made something long dormant stir in his chest, a woman with copper hair that fell like silk down her back, eyes the color of amber that held intelligence and fire, and a spine of pure steel despite being in the presence of someone who could end her existence with a thought. "Investigate Lord Brennan," he said quietly. "Report your findings directly to me." Serafina smiled, a small victory but a victory nonetheless. "As you wish, Your Majesty." From that night forward their relationship shifted. Serafina became more than decoration. She became his confidant, his investigator, his unexpected ally in a court full of vipers. She uncovered corruption, exposed traitors, and navigated political intrigues that had festered for centuries. And Casimir began to need her presence in ways that terrified him. He found himself listening for her footsteps in the halls, seeking her opinion on matters of state, watching the way candlelight played across her features during their increasingly lengthy dinners. She made him laugh, something he hadn't done in 300 years. She challenged him, frustrated him, and awakened parts of his soul he'd thought long dead. "Tell me about your mother," he asked one night, surprising both of them. Serafina's hand instinctively went to her pendant. "She was human," she said softly. "My father turned her for love, which scandalized the entire province. She died when I was young. The turning didn't take properly. Some humans aren't meant for immortality." "I'm sorry," Casimir said, and meant it. "Are you?" Serafina's eyes met his. You who called me temporary before even learning my name. You who made it clear I'm just a debt payment with an expiration date." The words hung between them like drawn swords. Casimir stood abruptly, crossing to the window to stare out at his kingdom. "It's easier that way," he said finally. "Everything is temporary when you're immortal. Everyone leaves eventually, to death, to betrayal, to the simple erosion of time. I learned centuries ago not to become attached." "That's not living," Serafina said, joining him at the window. "That's just existing." He turned to look down at her, and for a moment his careful control slipped. She saw raw longing in his eyes, desperate loneliness, and something else, something that made her breath catch in her throat. "Serafina," he whispered, her name on his lips for the first time. His hand reached up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. The kiss, when it came, felt like the world tilting on its axis. Centuries of cold isolation melted in the heat between them. Casimir pulled her close with trembling hands, kissing her like she was air and he'd been drowning, like she was light and he'd lived in darkness for too long. That night everything changed. The temporary arrangement became something neither of them could name but both desperately needed. They fell into each other like stars colliding, creating something new and brilliant and terrifyingly fragile. For 3 months they existed in a bubble of stolen happiness. Casimir would summon her to his private chambers, and they would talk for hours about everything and nothing. He showed her secret passages in the castle, shared stories from centuries past, let her see the man behind the crown. She taught him to laugh again, to hope again, to feel again. But he never said the words. He never called her anything but temporary. "The court is talking," his advisor Lord Thorne mentioned one morning. "They say the temporary companion has outstayed her purpose. The debt is paid, Your Majesty. Perhaps it's time to send her back to her father's province." Casimir felt something crack inside his chest, but his face remained impassive. "Soon," he said. "I will make the announcement soon." He didn't see Serafina standing in the doorway, didn't see the way her face paled at his words, didn't notice when she silently slipped away. That night he came to her chambers as usual, expecting their routine of dinner and conversation and the sweet oblivion of her embrace. But something was different. Serafina was distant, her smiles forced, her touches hesitant. "What troubles you?" he asked, pulling her close. "Am I still temporary?" The question was barely a whisper. Casimir froze. In all their time together, she'd never asked him to define what they were. He'd been grateful for that, had hidden behind the ambiguity like a shield. But now, looking into her eyes, he saw the vulnerability there, the hope, the desperate need for reassurance. And he panicked. "You've always been temporary," he said, the words coming out harsher than he intended. "You know this. From the beginning, this was never meant to be permanent. You're here until I decide otherwise." He felt her stiffen in his arms, saw the light die in her eyes, but he couldn't stop himself. Fear made him cruel. "Did you think this was something more? Did you think the Vampire King would bind himself to a minor lord's daughter? You've been useful, Serafina, and pleasant company, but don't mistake convenience for anything deeper." The silence that followed was deafening. Serafina carefully extracted herself from his embrace, her face a mask of perfect courtly composure, the same mask she'd worn that first night in his throne room. "Of course, Your Majesty," she said, her voice empty. "How foolish of me to forget my place. Will that be all for this evening?" Casimir wanted to take it back, wanted to pull her back into his arms and confess that she'd become as necessary to him as blood itself. But pride and fear kept him silent. He simply nodded and left, telling himself it was better this way, safer for them both. He didn't go to her chambers the next night or the night after. He threw himself into affairs of state, avoiding the parts of the castle where he might encounter her. When they did cross paths during court functions, she was perfectly polite, perfectly professional, and perfectly distant. It was exactly what he'd wanted. It was destroying him. 2 weeks later, during a council meeting, Serafina quietly collapsed. The castle physician emerged from Serafina's chambers with an expression that made Casimir's ancient blood run cold. He'd been pacing the hallway for hours, ever since she'd fainted during the council meeting and been carried away. The memory of her falling, of catching her unconscious body in his arms, had been playing on repeat in his mind. Well, Casimir demanded, his carefully maintained composure cracking. What's wrong with her? Dr. Lysander, who had served the royal house for 2 centuries, looked at his king with something between sympathy and reproach. Nothing is wrong with her, your majesty. Lady Seraphina is with child, approximately 6 weeks along. The world stopped spinning. Casimir stood frozen, unable to process the words. A child, his child, it was supposed to be impossible. Vampire fertility was rare to the point of being mythical, a blessing bestowed only once in several lifetimes. He started, then stopped, his mind racing. 6 weeks. The timing aligned perfectly with their last night together, before he'd pushed her away with cruel words and deliberate coldness. Congratulations, your majesty, Dr. Lysander said, though his tone held an edge. Though I must inform you, the Lady Seraphina has requested that I keep this information confidential. I'm violating her trust by telling you, but I thought you should know. She plans to leave the castle tonight. What? The word came out as a growl. She cannot leave, I forbid it. The debt is paid, your majesty. You yourself have made it clear repeatedly that her presence here is temporary. Legally, she has every right to return to her father's province. Dr. Lysander's eyes held steady. And perhaps, given the circumstances, it would be best for everyone if she did. Casimir's hand shot out, gripping the physician's collar. You forget yourself, doctor. No, your majesty, I believe you have forgotten yourself. The old vampire's voice was quiet but firm. That woman has served you faithfully, uncovered plots against your throne, brought light to these dark halls, and by all accounts has fallen deeply in love with you. And you've treated her as disposable. Now she carries your heir, a miracle that hasn't occurred in the royal bloodline for 5 centuries, and she's so certain of your rejection that she'd rather flee than tell you. The words hit like silver bullets. Casimir released the doctor, stepping back as the full weight of his mistakes crashed down upon him. Seraphina was pregnant with his child, and instead of coming to him with joy, she was running away in secret. Because he'd called her temporary, because he'd been too afraid to admit what she meant to him. Where is she? He demanded. I won't tell you that, your majesty. If you want to find her, you'll have to do it yourself, and perhaps think about what you'll say when you do, assuming she'll even listen to you. Dr. Lysander bowed and departed, leaving Casimir alone in the corridor. Through the heavy door of Seraphina's chambers, he could hear movement, the sounds of someone packing, preparing to leave forever. He should let her go. It would be safer for everyone. He was the vampire king with enemies in every shadow. Any woman beside him became a target, any child and heir to be eliminated by rival factions. Seraphina would be safer away from him, raising their child in the anonymity of her father's minor province. But the thought of never seeing her again, of their child growing up without knowing him, was more painful than anything he'd endured in 5 centuries of existence. Casimir raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. What could he say? How could he possibly explain or apologize? Words had never been his strength, action was what he understood. He turned and walked away, but not to hide. He had preparations to make. Inside her chambers, Seraphina folded another gown into her trunk with trembling hands. Tears streamed silently down her face, though she was too proud to sob aloud. One hand kept drifting to her still flat stomach, where an impossible miracle was growing. A child, she was carrying the vampire king's child. When she'd first suspected 3 days ago, she'd felt a surge of joy so intense it was almost painful. She'd imagined telling Casimir, pictured his face lighting up with wonder. Perhaps she'd thought this would be the thing that finally broke through his walls, that made him see her as more than temporary. Then she'd overheard him talking with Lord Thorn in the throne room. The companion becomes troublesome, your majesty, Thorn had said. She has too much influence in court now. Some are beginning to question why a temporary arrangement has lasted so long. It creates confusion about her status. You're right, Casimir had replied. It's time to end this arrangement. I'll send her back to her father's province within the fortnight. Find her a suitable husband there, someone appropriate to her station. It will quell any rumors and restore proper order to the court. Find her a suitable husband. The words had shattered something inside Seraphina. She'd stood there, one hand pressed against her stomach, and realized that Casimir would never see her as anything but temporary. Even carrying his child, if she told him, would just become another duty for him to manage, another political situation to resolve. She couldn't bear it. Couldn't bear to see the coldness in his eyes when she told him, couldn't watch him arrange a marriage to another man while taking her child to raise as a royal heir, couldn't be temporary for one more day. So she'd made her decision. Tonight she would leave. Her father's province wouldn't welcome her back, not pregnant and unwed. But she had money saved, jewelry she could sell, and her mother's sister lived in a human city to the east, past the borders of vampire territory. She would go there, raise her child in peace, and try to forget the vampire king who had stolen her heart and crushed it without even noticing. A knock at the door made her freeze. "Come in," she called, quickly wiping her eyes. Her handmaid Celeste entered, but she wasn't alone. Behind her came 3 more servants, all carrying things, furniture, tapestries, trunks of clothes and boxes of books. "What is all this?" Serafina asked, confused. Celeste smiled knowingly. "His Majesty's orders, my lady. We're to pack everything in your chambers. All of it is to be moved immediately." Pain lanced through Serafina's chest. So Casimir was that eager to be rid of her. He couldn't even wait the fortnight. He was having her belongings removed tonight. "I see," she said quietly. "I'll get out of your way then." "Oh no, my lady," Celeste said cheerfully. "You misunderstand. We're not packing these things to remove them from the castle. We're moving them to the king's private wing. His Majesty has ordered that your belongings be transferred to the Queen's chambers." The Queen's chambers. The words didn't make sense. Those rooms had been empty for 300 years, since Casimir's first wife had died in childbirth along with their stillborn son. No one had occupied them since. They were sacred, forbidden, a monument to the king's grief. "There must be some mistake," Serafina whispered. "No mistake, my lady. His Majesty was very clear. Everything is to be moved tonight." Celeste's eyes were twinkling. "He's preparing the chambers himself, won't let anyone else touch them. It's quite romantic, actually. We haven't seen him like this ever, to be honest." Serafina's mind was reeling. This didn't make sense. Just hours ago, Casimir had been planning to send her away. Now he was moving her into the Queen's chambers. Unless, had Dr. Lysander told him about the baby? Anger flared hot and bright in her chest. Of course, the child. That's what this was about. Not her, never her, just the heir she carried. Casimir was securing his bloodline, ensuring the baby's legitimacy. She would be moved to the Queen's chambers like a prized broodmare, given a title and position for the sake of the child, but still fundamentally temporary. Still not chosen for herself. "Stop," she said firmly. "Stop packing, I don't want any of this moved." Celeste looked stricken. "But my lady," the king commanded. "I don't care what he commanded. Those are my belongings and I say they stay here. Better yet, pack them in my travelling trunks. I'm leaving the castle tonight." "Leaving?" a deep voice came from the doorway. "I'm afraid I can't allow that." Serafina spun to find Casimir standing there, and her breath caught despite her anger. He looked different, vulnerable. His usually immaculate appearance was dishevelled, his dark hair mussed as if he'd been running his hands through it, his expression raw and uncertain. "You can't allow it," she repeated, her voice sharp. "You don't own me, Your Majesty. The debt is paid. I'm free to go wherever I wish." "You're right," he said quietly, dismissing the servants with a gesture. They fled quickly, leaving Serafina and Casimir alone. "I don't own you, I never did, but I'm asking, begging you to stay." "Why?" "Because of the child." She placed a protective hand over her stomach. "Dr. Lysander told you, didn't he? That's what this is about. You need an heir and suddenly I'm worth keeping around." Casimir flinched as if she'd struck him. "He did tell me about the baby, yes. And I won't lie, knowing you carry my child fills me with a joy I didn't think possible. But that's not why I'm asking you to stay. That's not why I had your things moved to the Queen's chambers." "Then why?" Tears were streaming down her face now. "So you can keep your temporary companion in a prettier cage. Give me a fancy title while still holding me at arm's length. I can't do it, Casimir. I can't be temporary anymore. It's killing me." He crossed the room in 3 strides, falling to his knees before her. The vampire king, the most powerful immortal in existence, on his knees with tears shining in his ancient eyes. "You were never temporary," he said, his voice breaking. Not from the moment you first challenged me, first made me laugh, first made me feel something other than emptiness. I called you temporary because I was terrified, because everyone I've ever loved has been taken from me, and I thought if I didn't name what we had, if I didn't claim you as mine, then maybe fate wouldn't notice. Maybe I could keep you safe by keeping you at a distance. His hands came up to frame her face with infinite gentleness. But I was wrong, so catastrophically wrong. By trying to protect you, I hurt you. By refusing to claim you publicly, I made you feel disposable. And now you're running away because I was too much of a coward to say 3 simple words. What words? Serafina whispered, afraid to hope. I love you. The words came out fierce and certain. I love you, Serafina Morau. I love your strength and your intelligence and your courage. I love the way you challenge me, the way you see through my masks, the way you've brought light back into my darkness. You are not temporary. You could never be temporary. You are my mate, my queen, my eternity, if you'll have me. Serafina was sobbing now, years of loneliness and weeks of heartbreak pouring out of her. You hurt me, she said. You made me feel like nothing. I know, God help me, I know, and I will spend the rest of our immortal lives making it up to you. I'm sorry, my love, I'm so desperately sorry. And the baby, she asked, is that what changed your mind? The baby made me act today instead of wasting more time being afraid. But my mind changed weeks ago, the first night I slept without you beside me and realized I'd rather face every danger in existence than spend another day without you. He pressed his forehead to hers. I love you, baby or no baby, I love you, I choose you. Not as temporary, not as convenient, but as mine. Forever. She pulled back to look into his eyes, searching for any hint of deception or duty. But all she saw was raw, honest love, terrifying in its intensity, beautiful in its truth. I love you too, she whispered. I've loved you for so long it hurts. The kiss was different from any they'd shared before. It wasn't passion or heat or desperate need, it was a promise, a claiming, a forever sealed in the meeting of their lips. When they finally broke apart, Casimir stood, pulling her up with him. Will you stay? He asked. Will you take your place as my queen, my partner, my equal? Will you let me love you the way you deserve, loudly and publicly and for all eternity? Serafina smiled through her tears. Yes, on one condition. Anything. Never call me temporary again. Never, he swore. You are permanent, you are forever, you are mine as I am yours. He swept her into his arms, carrying her toward the door. Where are we going? She laughed. To the Queen's chambers. Your chambers now. I've spent the last 3 hours preparing them, and I intend to spend the next 3 days showing you exactly how permanent you are to me. As they passed through the castle halls, servants and courtiers stopped and stared. The Vampire King was carrying Serafina openly, tenderly, his face transformed by joy. By the time they reached the Queen's chambers, word had already spread throughout the castle. The temporary companion was temporary no more. 3 months later the castle was transformed. Where once cold stone and shadows had reigned, now there was warmth and laughter. Serafina's presence as queen had brought changes that rippled through every aspect of court life. Diplomatic relations with neighbouring provinces improved, corruption was rooted out with ruthless efficiency, and the staff walked the halls with lighter steps. But not everyone was pleased with the changes. Lord Thorne stood in the shadows of the council chamber, watching as Casimir and Serafina worked side by side, reviewing trade agreements. The king's hand rested protectively on his queen's growing belly. She was nearly 5 months along now, the pregnancy finally beginning to show. It's disgusting, muttered Lady Ravenna, joining Thorne in the shadows. The mighty vampire king reduced to a lovesick fool, and for what? A minor noble's daughter who got lucky enough to seduce him. Thorne's eyes never left the couple. She's more dangerous than that. The girl has influence now, real influence. She's convinced him to implement reforms to change laws that have stood for centuries. She's making him weak. And the child, Ravenna asked quietly, will be the final nail in the coffin of his strength. Once the heir is born, his attention will be even more divided. He'll be vulnerable. A slow smile spread across Ravenna's beautiful face. Then perhaps we should ensure that the child is never born. Thorne turned to look at her fully. Lady Ravenna was ancient, nearly as old as Casimir himself, and had been a fixture at court for 2 centuries. She'd also been one of many who'd vied for the position of queen over the years, only to be rejected. "What are you suggesting?" Thorne asked carefully. "I'm suggesting that accidents happen, even in the most secure castles. A fall down the stairs, poison in her evening meal, so many tragic possibilities." Ravenna's voice was silk over steel. "And with the queen gone, things could return to how they were, with Casimir properly guided by his advisors, not distracted by a pretty face." "You're talking about murdering the queen," Thorne said flatly. "That's treason, that's death." "Only if we're caught." Ravenna moved closer. "You've been his advisor for 300 years, Thorne. Don't tell me you haven't noticed how he's changed. He questions your counsel now, seeks her opinion instead. How long before you're replaced entirely?" The word struck at Thorne's deepest fear. He had built his entire existence around being indispensable to Casimir, but since Serafina's arrival, he'd felt his influence waning, his advice dismissed, his position threatened. "I want no part in harming her directly," he said finally. "But perhaps, if certain security measures were to be overlooked, if certain guards were reassigned at crucial moments, if information about the Queen's routines were to become available to interested parties." Ravenna smiled. "That's all I ask, leave the rest to me." Neither of them noticed the small figure that slipped away from the keyhole, racing through the servant passages with urgent news. Celeste burst into the Queen's private study where Serafina was reviewing requests for audience. "My lady, you must hear this. I was cleaning near the council chamber, and I heard Lord Thorne and Lady Ravenna plotting." Serafina looked up sharply. "Plotting what?" "Against you, my lady, against the baby. Lady Ravenna spoke of accidents of poison, they want you dead." The quill snapped in Serafina's hand. She stood carefully, her mind already racing through possibilities. "You're certain of what you heard?" "Every word, my lady. Lord Thorne agreed to help by weakening your security. My lady, you must tell the king immediately." Serafina moved to the window, one hand on her belly where the baby was starting to kick regularly now. She should tell Casimir. Of course she should, but something held her back. If she ran to him with this, what would happen? He would be furious, would likely execute Thorne and Ravenna on the spot. But they were just the visible threat. How many others in the court resented her rise from temporary companion to queen? How many more plots would emerge from the shadows if she appeared weak, in need of the king's constant protection? No, she needed to handle this herself, needed to prove that she was strong enough to be queen not just in title, but in truth. "Celeste, I need you to do something for me," Serafina said quietly. "And you must tell no one, not the king, not anyone." The handmaid nodded nervously. "Anything, my lady." "I need you to let Lady Ravenna think her plan is working. Tell the other servants that I'll be walking in the East Gardens tomorrow at sunset, alone as I often do. Make sure word reaches Ravenna somehow." "But my lady..." "Trust me," Serafina said firmly. "I'm not the helpless girl who arrived here 8 months ago. I've learned from the best." The next day, Serafina prepared carefully. Hidden beneath her flowing gown was a silver blade, blessed and sharp. She wore her mother's pendant as always, but today she'd added protective charms woven into her hair by a witch she'd befriended in the nearby human town. Most importantly, she'd arranged for Casimir to be occupied with an emergency council session about border disputes, a convenient crisis she'd manufactured to keep him busy at exactly the right time. As sunset approached, Serafina made her way to the East Gardens alone. The gardens were beautiful at this hour, all crimson roses and lengthening shadows. They were also isolated, far from the main castle, with multiple exits and plenty of places for an ambush. "Perfect." She walked slowly along the paths, one hand resting on her belly, appearing lost in thought. But every sense was on high alert, tracking the subtle sounds of movement in the bushes, the whisper of fabric against stone. "My queen," a voice called out. Lady Ravenna emerged from behind a statue, her smile sharp as broken glass. "How lovely to find you here. Walking alone at such a late hour, is that wise in your condition?" "Lady Ravenna," Serafina acknowledged coolly. "I find the evening air helps with the pregnancy. Is there something I can do for you?" "Actually there is." Ravenna moved closer, and Serafina saw 2 more figures emerge from the shadows, Lord Brennan, whom she'd exposed for corruption months ago, and Lord Victor, who'd been passed over for a position that Serafina had recommended go to someone more competent. "You've made quite a few enemies, little queen," Ravenna continued. "Did you think there would be no consequences for your meddling, for your presumption in thinking you could waltz into this court and change everything?" "I think," Serafina said calmly, "that changing things that needed changing is exactly what a queen should do. The fact that you disagree says more about you than about me." Victor laughed harshly. "Bold words for someone surrounded and outmatched. You're what, barely a century old. Against the three of us you wouldn't last a minute." "That's where you're wrong," a new voice said, and Dr. Lysander stepped out from behind a different statue. "She's not alone." From other positions around the garden emerged more figures. The captain of the Queen's Guard, whom Serafina had personally promoted, the ambassador from the Western Covens, who owed Serafina a life debt, and several other allies she'd cultivated during her months as queen. Ravenna's face went pale. "What is this?" "This is a trap," Serafina said softly. "Did you think I wouldn't know about your plotting, that I wouldn't prepare? I've been playing the political game since before I could walk, Lady Ravenna. You threatened my child. That was your first mistake. Your second was assuming I was weak." "The king will hear about this," Brennan blustered. "The king," said Casimir's cold voice from the garden entrance, "already knows." Everyone froze as the vampire king stepped into the garden, his face a mask of controlled fury. Behind him came Lord Thorn in chains, already looking broken. Casimir crossed to Serafina's side, his hand immediately going to her waist. "Are you all right, the baby?" "We're both fine," she assured him. "I had everything under control." "I know you did." His eyes swept over the assembled conspirators. "My queen sent me a note 1 hour ago explaining everything, including the trap she'd set. She asked me to stay away, to let her handle it herself. I compromised, I stayed back, but I watched, and I saw everything." He turned his terrible gaze on Ravenna and her co-conspirators. "You plotted to murder my wife and unborn child. You conspired to commit treason against your queen. And Lord Thorn, you whom I trusted for 3 centuries, you enabled it all." "Your Majesty, please," Thorn began, but Casimir silenced him with a gesture. "Save your pleas, you'll face the blood court for your crimes, all of you." He nodded to the guards who'd entered behind him. "Take them to the dungeons. Their trial will be held tomorrow night." As the conspirators were dragged away, Ravenna screaming threats and promises of revenge, Casimir turned back to Serafina. For a moment his composure cracked, and she saw the fear underneath. "You took a terrible risk," he said quietly. "I had to. They needed to see that I'm not just your wife but a queen in my own right. That threatening me has consequences." "You could have been hurt, the baby." "Is fine, I'm fine. And now the court knows that the queen is not to be trifled with." She took his hand and placed it on her belly, where the baby was kicking vigorously. "Our child will be born into a stronger kingdom because of tonight." Casimir pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. "You terrify me," he whispered. "Your courage, your strength, you make me feel things I swore I'd never feel again. Fear, vulnerability, the desperate need to protect something that I could actually lose." "You won't lose me," Serafina promised. "We're forever, remember, you claimed me, I claimed you. Not even death could take that away." "Death," Casimir said darkly, "won't get the chance. After tonight I'm doubling your guard, restricting access to your chambers, and personally vetting everyone who comes within 20 feet of you." Serafina pulled back to look at him. "You'll do no such thing. I won't be made a prisoner in my own castle." "Serafina." "No, we'll make reasonable security improvements, yes, but I won't hide. I won't let fear rule us. We're building something here, Casimir, a better court, a better kingdom. That requires me to be visible, to be accessible, to be strong." He stared at her for a long moment, then laughed, a sound of pure exasperated love. "How did I ever think I could keep you as a temporary arrangement? You're the most permanent thing in my existence. You've taken over my entire life." "Good," she said, kissing him softly. "That was always the plan." That night, after the conspirators had been locked away, and the court had been informed of the attempted coup, Casimir held Serafina in their chambers, his hand splayed across her growing belly. I received a message from your father today, he said quietly. Serafina stiffened. She hadn't spoken to her father since the day he'd sent her to the castle to pay his debts. What did he want? To congratulate me on my marriage and upcoming heir. To suggest that now that his daughter is queen, perhaps his province deserves special trade considerations and tax exemptions. Anger flared hot in Serafina's chest. He sent me here like a payment, called it a temporary assignment, and now he wants to profit from it. That's what I thought you'd say. Casimir's smile was sharp. Which is why I've already sent my response. I informed him that you are queen by your own merit, not his, that his debts were paid in full and he gets nothing more, and that if he ever tries to use you for political gain again, I'll personally ensure his province becomes a historical footnote. Serafina turned in his arms to kiss him properly. Have I mentioned lately that I love you? Not in the last hour. I was beginning to worry. She laughed, the sound filling their chambers with warmth. Outside, the castle settled into night, safer now, stronger now, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Because the Vampire King had found his queen, and together they were unbreakable. The first pains came during a diplomatic dinner with the Eastern Covens. Serafina was in the middle of negotiating a trade agreement when her hand froze mid-gesture, her face going pale. Casimir, who had spent the last month watching her like a hawk, noticed immediately. Serafina. It's time, she whispered, another contraction stealing her breath. The baby is coming. The room erupted into chaos. Casimir swept his queen into his arms, shouting orders as he raced toward their chambers. Dr. Lysander had been on standby for weeks and was already there when they arrived, along with the midwife and a team of carefully vetted medical staff. You need to leave, Your Majesty, Dr. Lysander said firmly as they settled Serafina onto the bed. Absolutely not. Casimir's grip on Serafina's hand was unbreakable. I'm staying. Casimir, Serafina gasped between contractions. He's right. You should. I'm not leaving you, not for this, not for anything. His eyes met hers and she saw the terror there. He was remembering his first wife, who had died in this very room, in this very bed, bringing his first child into the world. I'm not her, Serafina said firmly, understanding. I'm not leaving you. I'm strong, the baby's strong, and we're both going to be fine. Promise me, he demanded, his voice breaking. I promise, we're forever, remember. The labor was long and difficult. Vampire births were rare for a reason. The child's developing supernatural strength made the process dangerous for the mother. Hour after hour, Serafina fought, Casimir never leaving her side, his ancient heart breaking with every cry of pain she couldn't suppress. I can't, she gasped after the 10th hour. Casimir, I can't do this. Yes, you can. He pressed his forehead to hers, pouring his strength into her. You're the strongest person I've ever known. You faced down a court full of enemies, survived assassination attempts, brought a 500-year-old vampire to his knees. You can do this. Tell me again, she whispered. I love you more than my own existence. You are my eternity, my queen, my everything. And I'm right here, I'm not going anywhere. With a final, tremendous effort, Serafina pushed, and suddenly the room was filled with a new sound, the strong, healthy cry of a newborn baby. A daughter, the midwife announced, tears streaming down her face. Your Majesties, you have a beautiful daughter. Dr. Lysander worked quickly, ensuring both mother and child were stable, before placing the tiny bundle in Serafina's arms. Casimir stared down at his daughter with an expression of absolute wonder. She was perfect, tiny and fierce, with her mother's copper-coloured hair already showing in wisps on her head, and her father's silver eyes looking up at them with supernatural awareness unusual in a newborn. Hello, little one, Serafina whispered, exhausted but radiant. We've been waiting for you. She needs a name, Casimir said, one finger gently stroking his daughter's impossibly soft cheek. Something strong, something that means she's ours, that she's permanent. Evangeline, Serafina said softly. It means bearer of good news. Because she's the promise of our future, proof that love is stronger than fear. Evangeline Nightshade, Casimir tested the name. Our daughter, our heir, our miracle. He looked at Serafina, tears shining in his eyes for the second time in their relationship. Thank you. For her, for everything, for giving me a reason to live instead of just exist. You've given me back my soul." "We gave each other everything," Serafina corrected. "That's how this works, that's what forever means." The castle celebrated for 3 days straight when the birth was announced. An heir to the throne, a healthy mother, and a king transformed by love. It was the beginning of a new era. But not everyone was celebrating. In the dungeons below, awaiting execution for her crimes, Lady Ravenna received a secret visitor in the dead of night. "I can offer you a choice," the cloaked figure said, voice distorted by magic. "Death at dawn or a chance at revenge." Ravenna looked up, interest kindling in her eyes despite her dire circumstances. "I'm listening." "The Queen has made enemies beyond these castle walls. Powerful enemies who see her influence over the Vampire King as a threat to the old ways. They're willing to offer you resources, allies, a chance to strike back at those who imprisoned you." "In exchange for what?" "The child, steal the heir, and all crimes against you will be forgiven. You'll be given your own province to rule, wealth beyond measure. All we need is the baby." Ravenna's smile was vicious. "Tell your masters they have a deal." The cloaked figure melted back into shadows, and Ravenna began to plan. 3 weeks later, Serafina woke in the middle of the night to an empty cradle. The window to the nursery was open, curtains blowing in the night wind, and her daughter was gone. Her scream brought Casimir running, brought guards flooding into the room, brought the entire castle into emergency lockdown. But it was too late. Someone had taken Evangeline. "Find her," Casimir roared, his power shaking the castle foundations. "Tear apart the kingdom if you have to, but find my daughter." Serafina stood frozen, staring at the empty cradle, her mind threatening to shatter. Then training kicked in, the same iron composure that had gotten her through her mother's death, through months of being called temporary, through assassination attempts and political intrigue. "The window," she said, her voice deadly calm. "They went out the window, which means they had to go down the east wall. There are only 3 paths from there that don't lead through guarded checkpoints." She moved to the map on the nursery wall, the one she'd studied 100 times while planning the room's security. "The river, the old servants' passage, or the crypt entrance. The river is too loud, the baby would have cried and alerted guards. The servants' passage has been sealed for renovations. That leaves the crypt." Casimir was already moving. "The crypts connect to the old tunnel system under the castle. They emerge 5 miles away in the forest." "Then that's where we go, now." They raced through the castle, gathering a strike force as they went. Casimir was a force of pure fury, his vampiric speed blurring reality as he moved. But it was Serafina who led them through the crypts, her analytical mind tracking the subtle signs. A disturbed cobweb here, a fresh scuff mark there. "They have maybe a 30-minute head start," she said, moving deeper into the darkness. "We can catch them." They emerged from the tunnels into the forest to find a group of vampires waiting with weapons drawn. And in the center, holding baby Evangeline, was Lady Ravenna. "Looking for something," Ravenna taunted, the baby crying in her arms. "Take 1 step closer and I'll snap her neck." "You'll die before you can complete the motion," Casimir said, his voice arctic. "Put down my daughter, now." "I don't think so. This child is my ticket to—" She never finished the sentence. Serafina moved with speed that shocked everyone present, closing the distance and slamming into Ravenna with devastating force. The impact knocked the baby free, and Casimir caught Evangeline with supernatural precision, cradling her close as Serafina and Ravenna went down in a tangle of fury. "You threatened my child," Serafina hissed, her hands around Ravenna's throat. "You stole my baby from her cradle. You've made the last mistake of your existence." Ravenna tried to fight back, but Serafina was fighting with a mother's rage. Within seconds it was over. Ravenna lay broken and defeated, Serafina standing over her, breathing hard. "The rest of you have a choice," Casimir said, addressing Ravenna's allies while still holding his crying daughter. "Surrender now and face trial, or fight and face me. Choose quickly." They chose surrender. Smart vampires knew better than to face the Vampire King when his family had been threatened. On the journey back to the castle, with Evangeline safely in her mother's arms and the conspirators in chains, Serafina finally allowed herself to shake with reaction. "I almost lost her," she whispered. "I almost lost our daughter." "But you didn't. You saved her. You tracked her. You fought for her. You got her back." Casimir wrapped his arms around both his girls. "You're an extraordinary mother, an extraordinary queen, and an extraordinary woman, and I fall more in love with you every single day." "I was so scared," she admitted. "So was I, but we faced it together. That's what we do, we face everything together." Back at the castle, they discovered the scope of the conspiracy. Ravenna had been working with a coalition of vampire lords who resented Casimir's new policies and Serafina's influence. The plan had been to take Evangeline, raise her away from her parents, and use her as a puppet ruler when she came of age. "They're afraid," Serafina realized, reading through the captured documents. "All of this, the assassination attempts, the kidnapping, it's because they're afraid of the changes we're making, afraid of losing their power." "Then they should be afraid," Casimir said coldly, "because after tonight, everyone will know what happens to those who threaten my family." The trials were swift and the justice absolute. Ravenna and her co-conspirators were executed at dawn. The vampire lords who'd funded the plot were stripped of their titles and exiled, and Casimir made a declaration that echoed through every vampire territory in existence. "The Queen and the heir are under my personal protection. Any threat against them will be considered an act of war against me personally. There will be no mercy, no second chances, no forgiveness. My family is sacrosanct, and anyone who forgets that will learn exactly why I've held this throne for 500 years. The message was received, the threat stopped, and the family began to heal. Years passed, decades, then centuries. Evangeline grew into a formidable young woman, equal parts her mother's intelligence and her father's strength. More children followed, twin sons with Serafina's copper hair and fierce loyalty to each other, and a youngest daughter who inherited her father's silver eyes and her mother's gift for diplomacy. The castle that had once been cold and empty became filled with life and laughter. Casimir, who had thought himself too broken for love, became the most devoted husband and father in vampire history. Serafina, who had arrived as a temporary arrangement, became the greatest queen the immortal realm had ever known. "Do you remember that first night?" Casimir asked one evening, centuries later, as they watched the sunset from their private balcony. "When I called you temporary?" "I remember," Serafina said, leaning into his embrace. "I also remember wanting to stake you for it." He laughed, the sound still as wonderful as the first time she'd drawn it from him. "I was such a fool." "Yes, you were, but you learned." She turned in his arms to face him. "We both learned. We learned that love is worth the risk, that family is worth fighting for, that forever is something you choose every day." "I choose you," Casimir said, as he had every day for the past 300 years. "Today and always I choose you." "And I choose you," Serafina replied, kissing him softly. "My king, my love, my eternity." In the distance they could hear their children laughing, training with the guards, living the safe and happy lives that Casimir and Serafina had fought so hard to build. The kingdom was prosperous, the court was stable, and the future stretched before them like an endless gift. The vampire king had called her temporary, but she had stayed and taught him the meaning of forever. And they lived it together, one chosen day at a time, for all the ages to come.